He thought he knew everything about his wife after 24 years, until one night shattered his world. What happens when the person you trust the most becomes a complete stranger? Stay tuned to find out. In the city of Denver, Colorado, life was about to take a drastic turn for Ethan Parker, a 44-year-old senior engineer at RoboSync Technologies, a company he co-founded with his brother. Ethan had always been a hardworking and dedicated man, both to his job and to his family. He was married to Rachel Parker, who was 42 and worked as an administrative manager at a local school. They had been married for 24 years and shared a daughter named Megan, who had recently graduated from college. Ethan came home one Friday evening, exhausted from a long day of meetings and project deadlines. He was looking forward to a quiet night with Rachel, but something felt off. As soon as he stepped through the front door, he saw his wife sitting in the living room with her sister Jessica, both looking unusually serious. Two small suitcases sat by the front door. "Ethan, we need to talk," Rachel said, her voice shaking a bit. Ethan's heart sank. "What's going on?" he asked, his mind racing through all the possibilities. Rachel took a deep breath, exchanging a glance with Jessica. "I've met someone else," she said. "Someone who's more exciting, more in tune with my needs than you've been." Ethan stood there, stunned, as Jessica smirked and nodded in agreement. "You deserve better, Rachel," Jessica chimed in. "You need a real man who can give you everything you want." Ethan clenched his jaw, fighting to keep his emotions in check. He had never imagined that this would be how things ended, but he wasn't going to let them see him break. "Is that why you've been staying out so late with your sister?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Rachel hesitated for a moment, but then she straightened her shoulders. "Yes, and I've made up my mind. I'll be staying with Jessica this weekend, and we'll talk more about this when I get back." Ethan watched them leave, the sound of the door closing echoing in the empty house. He stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened, but the anger and betrayal were already boiling inside him. Determined to clear his head, Ethan grabbed a bottle of whiskey and decided to drive out to Cherry Creek State Park, a spot he used to visit whenever he needed to think. It was late, and the park was almost deserted. Ethan parked his hybrid car near the lake, took a sip of his whiskey, and tried to make sense of everything. After a while, a tap on his window jolted him back to reality. Ethan looked up to see a young man in a police uniform who had a friendly yet curious expression on his face. "Hey, can I ask what you're up to?" the officer said. Ethan sighed and took another sip of his drink. "Just trying to clear my head," he replied. "Is that a crime?" "Not really," the officer said, eyeing the whiskey bottle in Ethan's hand. "But I'd say drinking in your car at a public park isn't the best idea, sir." "I'm not driving," Ethan retorted. "Just sitting here, enjoying the moonlight and my drink. It's been a rough day." The officer's name tag read Tyler Anderson, and he seemed genuinely concerned. "Look, I get it," Tyler said. "But I still have to make sure you're not going to cause any trouble. Can I see your ID?" Ethan handed over his driver's license without protest. "What's your name, officer?" he asked. "Tyler," the young man replied as he checked the ID. "Just call me Tyler." Ethan chuckled. "All right, Tyler. I'm not planning to go anywhere tonight. This car's set up to prevent me from driving if I'm intoxicated." Tyler nodded, seemingly impressed. "That's a pretty advanced system. But you still shouldn't be drinking out here alone." "I'm not in the mood to be around anyone else," Ethan muttered. Tyler studied him for a moment before handing back the license. "Tell you what," he said. "Why don't we just sit here and chat for a bit? I'll make sure you don't do anything stupid, and you can talk if you need to. Sound fair?" Ethan sighed, realizing that Tyler wasn't going to leave him alone. "Sure, why not?" As they sat there, Ethan began to open up about what had happened with Rachel. He didn't know why he felt compelled to share such personal details with a stranger, but there was something comforting about Tyler's calm and non-judgmental demeanor. Tyler listened patiently, nodding occasionally. "Man, that's rough," he said when Ethan finished. "I'm sorry you're going through that." Ethan shrugged, trying to act indifferent, but his voice betrayed him. "I just don't understand. 24 years together, and now she's throwing it all away for some Guy she barely knows? People change, Tyler replied thoughtfully. Sometimes they just don't know how to handle the changes they're going through. Ethan took another swig of his whiskey. Well, I'm not about to let her turn me into some fool waiting around for her to make up her mind. I'm done. Good for you, Tyler said with a nod. But just make sure you don't do anything you'll regret. You've got a lot going for you, and you don't want to mess that up. Ethan managed a weak smile. You're wise beyond your years, Tyler. Yeah, well, I've seen a lot for someone my age, Tyler replied. My dad walked out on my mom when I was a kid. It was rough, but we got through it. Ethan sighed, feeling a little more at ease. Thanks for listening. I didn't mean to dump all of this on you. No worries, Tyler said, standing up. Just promise me you'll call someone to pick you up when you're ready to leave, okay? Ethan nodded. You have my word. Tyler gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder before heading back to his patrol car. As he drove away, Ethan leaned back in his seat, staring out at the lake. For the first time in hours, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. The next morning, Ethan woke up in his car, groggy but clear-headed. He called his daughter Megan to come pick him up, knowing he couldn't stay in the park any longer. She arrived within half an hour, looking concerned but relieved. Dad, are you okay? She asked, giving him a hug as soon as he stepped out of the car. I've been better, Ethan admitted, but I'll be fine. Megan studied him for a moment before nodding. Come on, let's get you home. Over the next few days, Ethan threw himself into his work at RoboSync Technologies, spending long hours at the office to distract himself from the pain. He barely saw Rachel, who was staying with her sister, Jessica, and avoiding him altogether. One afternoon, Ethan's brother, Ryan Parker, walked into his office with a concerned expression on his face. Ryan was 47, a bit older than Ethan, and the business-minded half of their partnership. He had a sharp, no-nonsense attitude, but always looked out for his little brother. Ethan, we need to talk, Ryan said, closing the door behind him. Not you too, Ethan groaned. I've had enough talks for one lifetime. Ryan ignored the comment and took a seat. I heard about Rachel, he said gently. I'm sorry, man. Ethan looked away, not wanting his brother to see how much it hurt. It is what it is, he muttered. Ryan was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward. Look, I don't want to pry, but you need to know that everyone at the company is talking about this. People saw her with that guy at the Hilton Grand Plaza last weekend, and rumors are spreading. Of course they are, Ethan said, rubbing his temples. What else is new? Do you know who the guy is? Ryan asked. Ethan shook his head. Not yet, but I'm going to find out. Ryan hesitated, then said, I'm going to be straight with you, Ethan. You need to protect yourself, personally and professionally. Make sure Rachel doesn't try to come after your shares in the company. Ethan looked up, his eyes narrowing. She wouldn't dare. People do crazy things when they're desperate, Ryan replied. Just be prepared, okay? Ethan nodded, appreciating his brother's bluntness. Thanks, Ryan. I'll take care of it. Ryan gave him a pat on the shoulder. Good. And if you need anything, you know I'm here. That evening, as Ethan sat in his apartment, he finally allowed himself to confront the situation. He knew he couldn't just sit back and let Rachel destroy everything he had worked for. So he started to make a plan. The next day, he hired a private investigator to track down the man Rachel was seeing. Within 48 hours, he had a name. Travis Bennett, a 35-year-old account manager at a nearby marketing firm. The investigator even managed to capture a few pictures of Rachel and Travis together, laughing and holding hands like a pair of teenagers. Ethan's blood boiled as he looked through the images. How could she do this to him? To their family? But instead of letting the anger consume him, Ethan channeled it into action. He called his attorney, Mark Sanders, and set up a meeting to discuss his options. Mark, a sharp and experienced divorce lawyer, listened patiently as Ethan laid out everything he knew. You've got a solid case, Mark said after Ethan finished. But if you want to protect yourself, you'll need to gather more evidence. Make it clear that she's the one who broke the marriage. How much time do we have? Ethan asked. Enough, Mark replied with a reassuring smile. We'll get through this. As Ethan left the office that day, he felt a renewed sense of determination. He wasn't going to let Rachel walk away from their marriage without facing the consequences of her actions. Over the following days, Ethan meticulously planned his next steps. He had no intention of playing the victim, and if Rachel thought she could simply move on with her life while he quietly accepted defeat, she had another thing coming. One Friday night, Ethan found himself back at the Hilton Grand Plaza, this time parked discreetly a few spots away from Rachel's car. He had received a tip from his investigator that she and Travis were meeting there again. As he waited, memories of their happier days kept flooding back, but he shook them off, determined to focus on what needed to be done. Around 9 p.m., he saw them. Rachel and Travis exited the hotel together, laughing like carefree teenagers. Ethan clenched his fists, fighting the urge to storm out of his car and confront them then and there. Instead, he pulled out his phone and snapped a few pictures. They were clear enough to be irrefutable evidence, and that's all he needed. Later that night, Ethan drove home, feeling a strange mix of anger and relief. He had what he needed to prove Rachel's infidelity, but seeing her with another man made the reality of their broken marriage hit him all over again. The next morning, Ethan met with his brother, Ryan, in a small cafe near the RoboSync Technologies office. He handed over the pictures he'd taken. Ryan glanced through them, his expression hardening. "She's not even trying to hide it," Ryan muttered, shaking his head. "What's her endgame here?" Ethan shrugged. "Does it matter?" "I'm done playing her game." Ryan nodded approvingly. "Good. It's time to take control back." Ethan's attorney, Mark Sanders, called later that afternoon with an update. "I've got everything I need to move forward," Mark said. "You've built a solid case, Ethan. She doesn't stand a chance." "Thank you, Mark," Ethan replied. "I'm ready to move on from this." But the surprises weren't over yet. That evening, as Ethan sat at home, he received a call from Rachel. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, but something made him pick up. "Ethan," Rachel began, her voice strained. "We need to talk." "About what?" Ethan said, barely concealing his annoyance. "About us," she replied. "I made a mistake. I thought I wanted something different, but now I realize that I've ruined everything. Can you meet me at the house tomorrow? Please." Ethan hesitated. Part of him wanted to hang up and never speak to her again, but another part wanted to hear what she had to say. "Fine," he said finally. "I'll be there." The next morning, Ethan drove to their house, bracing himself for whatever Rachel had planned. As he stepped inside, he was hit with a wave of nostalgia, memories of a life that no longer existed. Rachel was waiting in the living room, looking more nervous than he had ever seen her. "I know I've hurt you," she began, wringing her hands together. "But I want you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. Travis, he was just a distraction. Something to make me feel alive again. But I realize now that I don't want to lose you." Ethan stared at her, trying to process her words. "You think we can just go back to the way things were?" he asked, his voice calm but tinged with disbelief. "No," Rachel said quickly, tears forming in her eyes. "I know I've broken your trust, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn it back. Please, Ethan, just give me one more chance." For a moment, Ethan felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly replaced by the memory of all the nights he had spent alone, wondering where she was. "You already had plenty of chances," he replied coldly, "and you chose to throw them away." "But Ethan," Rachel began, but he cut her off. "No," he said firmly. "I've made my decision, and I'm not changing my mind. You'll hear from my lawyer soon." Rachel's shoulders slumped, and she nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Without another word, Ethan turned and walked out the door, feeling a sense of closure wash over him. He had said what he needed to say, and now it was time to move on. Back at his apartment, Ethan found himself feeling lighter, as if a massive weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He picked up his phone and sent a quick text to Megan, asking if she wanted to grab dinner that evening. She replied almost immediately, saying she'd love to. That night, as they sat in a cozy Italian restaurant, Megan looked at her father with a mix of concern and admiration. "You're handling this better than I thought you would," she said, her eyes searching his. Ethan managed a small smile. "I guess I just realized that there's no point in holding on to something that's already gone." Megan nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "I'm proud of you, Dad." "Thanks, sweetheart," Ethan replied, feeling a warmth spread through him. "I'm going to be okay." As they finished their meal, Ethan's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Tyler, the young police officer he had met in the park. "Hey, just checking in," the message read. "How are things going?" Ethan couldn't help but smile. "Better," he typed back. "Much better." Tyler responded almost immediately. "Glad to hear it. We should grab a drink sometime. My treat." "Sounds like a plan," Ethan replied. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like everything was going to be okay. The weeks passed, and Ethan began to settle into his new life. He moved out of his temporary apartment and into a small but comfortable condo in a quiet neighborhood. He spent more time with his daughter, and Tyler became a regular fixture in their lives, quickly becoming a good friend. Ethan threw himself into his work at RoboSync Technologies, and under his and Ryan's leadership, the company continued to grow. They secured several new contracts, and Ethan even began working on a side project to develop a new line of prosthetics designed to help wounded veterans. It was something he had always wanted to do, and now he had the freedom to make it happen. As Ethan's life began to stabilize, he found himself enjoying his new routine. One afternoon, while he was finalizing a project at the RoboSync Technologies office, Ryan walked in with a serious expression on his face. "We've got a situation," Ryan said, taking a seat across from Ethan's desk. "Remember that guy Rachel was seeing? Travis?" Ethan looked up from his computer, already sensing trouble. "What about him?" "He's been telling anyone who'll listen that he's been wrongfully terminated from his job because of you," Ryan replied. "Apparently he was fired after his bosses found out he was seeing a married woman, and now he's trying to pin the blame on us." Ethan's jaw clenched. "How is that our problem?" Ryan leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "He's threatening to sue us for defamation, claiming that you went around spreading rumors about him at his workplace." "That's ridiculous," Ethan scoffed. "I've never even spoken to his employer." "I know," Ryan said. "But we still need to be careful. Our legal team is already on it. But I thought you should know." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to keep his anger in check. "Thanks for letting me know," he said. "I'll cooperate with whatever they need." Later that evening, as Ethan sat at his condo, he couldn't shake the frustration that had been building up all day. First, Rachel's betrayal. And now this. It felt like every time he tried to move forward, something pulled him back. The next day, Ethan met with his lawyer, Mark Sanders, to discuss the situation. "Travis has no case," Mark assured him. "We've already gathered enough evidence to prove that you had no involvement in his termination, but he might try to drag this out to squeeze a settlement from you." Ethan shook his head, disgusted. "I'm not giving that guy a dime." "And you won't have to," Mark said confidently. "We'll handle it." After their meeting, Ethan decided to blow off some steam at the gym. It was something he hadn't done in years, but he quickly found that the physical exertion helped clear his mind. As he worked up a sweat, he felt the stress begin to melt away, replaced by a sense of clarity. He was halfway through his workout when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Tyler. "You still up for that drink?" Ethan smiled and replied, "Absolutely. Meet me at the Mile High Tavern at 8? "See you there," Tyler wrote back. That evening, Ethan walked into the Mile High Tavern, a cozy, dimly lit bar in downtown Denver. It was a place he used to frequent in his younger years, back when life was simpler. As he looked around, he felt a wave of nostalgia wash over him. Tyler arrived shortly after, and they settled into a booth with their drinks. "You look like you needed this," Tyler remarked, taking a sip of his beer. "You have no idea," Ethan replied, running a hand through his hair. "It's just one thing after another." Tyler nodded, his expression serious. "You know, I've seen a lot of people go through rough patches in my line of work. But you're handling this better than most. Ethan chuckled. If you say so. I mean it, Tyler insisted. You're not letting it break you. That takes strength. Ethan stared into his glass, feeling a flicker of gratitude. Thanks, Tyler. That means a lot. The two men talked for hours, sharing stories about their lives, their families, and the struggles they'd faced. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he was connecting with someone who understood what he was going through. As they left the bar, Tyler clapped him on the shoulder. You're going to be all right, Ethan. I know it. Yeah, Ethan said, smiling. I think I will be. The next week brought more unexpected news. Ethan received a call from his private investigator, who had been digging into Travis's background at Ethan's request. I found something you might be interested in, the investigator said. Turns out Travis has a bit of a history with married women. Rachel isn't the first. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? He's got a pattern, the investigator explained. A few years back, he had an affair with another married woman in Phoenix. When her husband found out, Travis tried to blackmail him for money, threatening to go public with their affair. Ethan's mind raced as he processed the information. You have proof of this? I've got enough to paint a pretty clear picture, the investigator replied. It might be worth using if this lawsuit goes any further. Send me everything you have, Ethan said, a sense of determination washing over him. Armed with this new information, Ethan met with his lawyer the next day. This changes everything, Mark said, examining the documents the investigator had provided. If Travis wants to take this to court, he's going to regret it. As the lawsuit dragged on, Ethan took solace in the fact that he wasn't fighting this battle alone. Megan and Tyler were always there to support him, and even Ryan took on extra responsibilities at RoboSync to give Ethan the time he needed to focus on the case. After weeks of legal maneuvering, Travis's lawsuit was finally dismissed. Ethan walked out of the courthouse, feeling a sense of victory that he hadn't felt in months. He had stood up for himself and come out on top. That evening, he received an unexpected visitor. As Ethan opened his front door, he was surprised to see Rachel standing there, looking lost and unsure. Rachel? Ethan said, his voice tinged with disbelief. What are you doing here? I heard about the lawsuit, she replied quietly. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, searching her face for any sign of sincerity. You should have thought about that before, he said finally. I know, Rachel whispered, tears filling her eyes. I wanted you to know that I've ended things with Travis. I realize now what a mistake I made. Ethan sighed, feeling a mix of anger and pity. It's too late for that, Rachel. I know, she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. But I wanted to try to make things right. There's nothing left to fix, Ethan replied. We're done. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks, and without another word, turned and walked away. As Ethan closed the door, he felt a strange sense of closure. The pain was still there, but it wasn't as sharp as it had been before. He had faced his demons and come out stronger on the other side, and that was all the closure he needed. As the weeks passed, Ethan gradually settled into his new life. He started going out more, reconnecting with old friends, and even joined a local hiking group to explore the beautiful trails around Denver. For the first time in years, he felt like he was truly living again. One weekend, Ethan and Ryan decided to take a break from work and spend a day fishing at Chatfield Reservoir, a spot they used to visit with their dad when they were kids. It was a welcome escape from the chaos that had taken over Ethan's life in recent months. As they set up their fishing gear, Ryan glanced over at his younger brother. You seem happier, he remarked. I was worried about you for a while. Ethan nodded, casting his line into the water. I think I just needed some time to process everything. It hasn't been easy, but I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. Good, Ryan said, giving him a reassuring smile. You deserve it. They fished in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds being the gentle lapping of the water and the occasional chirping of birds. It reminded Ethan of simpler times, and he felt a sense of peace wash over him. By the way, Ryan said suddenly, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What is it? Now that things have settled down a bit, I was wondering if you'd be interested in taking on a new project at RoboSync, Ryan said. We've been getting inquiries about developing more advanced prosthetics, especially for kids with disabilities. I know it's something you've always been passionate about. Ethan felt a spark of excitement. You're serious? Absolutely, Ryan replied. I've already run the numbers, and I think it's a project we can take on without stretching ourselves too thin. A smile spread across Ethan's face. Let's do it. That evening, as Ethan sat in his condo, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The idea of working on a project that could make a real difference in people's lives gave him a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in a long time. He grabbed his phone and sent a quick text to Megan. Want to come over for dinner this week? I've got some exciting news. Her response was almost immediate. Yes. Can't wait to hear about it. A few days later, Megan arrived at Ethan's condo with a bottle of wine in hand. As they sat down to eat, Ethan told her about the new project. We're going to be developing advanced prosthetics for kids, he explained. It's something I've always wanted to do, and now it's finally happening. That's amazing, Dad, Megan exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. I'm so proud of you. Thanks, sweetheart, Ethan said, feeling a swell of pride himself. I'm just glad to have something positive to focus on. As they talked, Ethan noticed how much Megan had grown over the past few months. She seemed more confident, more independent, and it filled him with a sense of pride that his daughter was becoming such a strong, capable woman. Later that night, after Megan had left, Ethan received another text from Tyler. Hey, we're having a little get-together this weekend. You should come. Ethan hesitated for a moment. It had been a while since he'd been to any sort of social event, and part of him was nervous about putting himself out there again. But then, he thought about all the progress he had made, and decided it was time to take another step forward. Count me in, he replied. The weekend arrived, and Ethan found himself at Tyler's apartment, surrounded by a small group of people he had never met before. But instead of feeling out of place, he felt a sense of belonging. Tyler introduced him to his friends, and soon, Ethan was laughing and sharing stories as if he had known them for years. As the night went on, Ethan found himself talking to a woman named Samantha, who worked as a physical therapist at a nearby hospital. They bonded over their shared interest in helping others, and Ethan felt an instant connection with her. She was warm, intelligent, and had a sense of humor that made him laugh in a way he hadn't in a long time. By the end of the night, Samantha handed him her phone. Put your number in, she said with a smile. I'd love to grab coffee with you sometime. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. I'd like that, he replied. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Samantha began seeing each other regularly. They went on hikes, tried out new restaurants, and spent hours talking about everything and nothing. For the first time since his marriage had ended, Ethan felt a spark of happiness that he thought he'd never feel again. One evening, as they sat on his balcony, watching the sunset over the Denver skyline, Samantha turned to him. You're different than anyone I've ever met, she said softly. Ethan chuckled. Is that a good thing? It's a very good thing, she replied, leaning in to kiss him. As they sat there, wrapped up in each other, Ethan realized that life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. He had gone through hell and back, but somehow, he had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever came next. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Parker was truly happy. As Ethan's relationship with Samantha deepened, so did his involvement with the prosthetics project at RoboSync Technologies. He threw himself into the work, determined to make a meaningful impact. The team had developed a prototype for an advanced robotic limb that was more intuitive and responsive than anything currently on the market, and Ethan was thrilled with their progress. One afternoon, Ethan received an unexpected email from a military veterans organization. They had heard about his project and wanted to discuss a potential partnership to provide prosthetics to wounded veterans at a reduced cost. Ethan was ecstatic. It was the kind of opportunity he had always dreamed of. He called Ryan into his office and shared the news. This is huge, Ryan said, grinning from ear to ear. You're really making a difference, Ethan. I couldn't have done it without you, Ethan replied sincerely. You've always had my back, even when things got tough. Ryan's smile softened. That's what brothers are for. The partnership with the Veterans Organization marked a turning point for RoboSync Technologies. The company gained national recognition, and soon, orders for their advanced prosthetics were pouring in. Ethan found himself busier than ever, but it was a different kind of busy, one that filled him with purpose and pride. One day, as he was working late in the office, his phone buzzed with a text from Samantha. Hey, I've got a surprise for you. Can you meet me at the Union Station Cafe in an hour? Curious, Ethan wrapped up his work and made his way to the cafe. When he arrived, he saw Samantha standing by the entrance, holding a small gift box. She smiled when she saw him and handed him the box. What's this? Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. Open it, Samantha said, looking excited. Ethan carefully lifted the lid and found a beautifully engraved silver watch inside. I thought you could use something to remind you of how far you've come, she said softly. You've accomplished so much, and I'm proud of you. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. Thank you, Samantha, he said, pulling her into a hug. You have no idea how much this means to me. Well, I've got one more surprise, she added with a mischievous grin. Ethan looked at her quizzically. Oh? Samantha nodded. I managed to pull a few strings at the hospital, and I've arranged for you to meet a young boy who's going to be one of the first recipients of your prosthetics. The next day, Ethan and Samantha visited the hospital, where they were introduced to Caleb, a 10-year-old boy who had lost his arm in a car accident. Caleb's face lit up when he saw the prototype, and as Ethan helped him put it on, the boy's eyes filled with wonder. This is amazing, Caleb said, flexing his new robotic fingers. I can actually feel it. Ethan felt a surge of emotion as he watched the boy test out the prosthetic. It's all yours, Caleb, he said, smiling. And if there's anything we can do to make it even better, you let us know, okay? Thank you, Caleb exclaimed, giving Ethan a big hug. As they left the hospital, Samantha took Ethan's hand in hers. You're doing something incredible, she whispered. You're changing lives. Ethan looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. So are you, he replied. A few months later, RoboSync Technologies hosted an event to celebrate the launch of their new line of prosthetics. Ethan stood on stage, looking out at the crowd of employees, clients, and community members who had gathered to support them. Thank you all for being here today, he began. This journey started as a simple idea, to create something that could change lives. But it's become so much more than that. It's become a mission, a purpose, and a reminder that no matter how difficult life gets, we can always find a way to rebuild, to grow, and to make a difference. The crowd erupted in applause, and as Ethan stepped down from the stage, he felt a sense of fulfillment that he had never experienced before. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's life settled into a comfortable rhythm. He continued to build his relationship with Samantha, spent more quality time with Megan, and grew closer to Tyler, who had become a trusted friend. His bond with Ryan was stronger than ever, and they often reminisced about the early days of RoboSync, marveling at how far they had come. One evening, as Ethan, Megan, Tyler, and Samantha gathered at Ethan's condo for a family dinner, they sat around the table, laughing and sharing stories. It was a simple moment, but one that felt like the culmination of everything Ethan had worked for. The chance to be surrounded by the people he loved and who had stood by him through his darkest times. As they finished their meal, Megan raised her glass. To new beginnings, she said, her eyes shining with pride, and to finding happiness, no matter where life takes us. Hear, hear, Tyler added, clinking his glass with hers. Ethan smiled, looking around at the faces of the people who had become his family. To new beginnings, he echoed. And as he took a sip of his drink, he knew, without a doubt, that he had finally found his way home.